Have you ever sat at Christmas dinner, watching your family laugh as if they hid no secrets, only for my grandfather to freeze the room with one sentence? That night, he pointed at a name I had never heard and told me someone was living on my future. I barely had time to breathe before the doorbell rang, and two police officers walked in as if they had been waiting for that exact second. My name is Reese Holloway, and up until 20 minutes ago, my biggest worry was whether my beat-up sedan would survive the drive back to my studio apartment on the wrong side of town. I was 29 years old, drowning in student loans, and currently working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. I sat at the dining table in my grandfather's sprawling estate in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, feeling like an imposter in my own lineage. The dining room smelled of roasted duck, pine needles, and the expensive, heavy perfume my mother always wore to mask the scent of her 3rd glass of Chardonnay. Everything was perfectly orchestrated. The porcelain was bone white, the crystal glasses caught the light of the chandelier, and the napkins were folded into shapes that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My parents, Dean and Marla, were seated across from me, radiating that frantic, manicured energy of people desperate to prove they were happy. Next to them sat my brother, Gavin, and his wife, Brielle. Gavin was the golden child, the one who had apparently figured out the puzzle of adulthood while I was still looking for the corner pieces. He was adjusting his silk tie, laughing a little too loudly at a joke my father had made about the weather. At the head of the table sat my grandfather, Walter Grayson. Walter was not a man who laughed at jokes about the weather. He was 78 years old, built like a retired linebacker who had refused to let gravity win. And he possessed a gaze that could peel the paint off a wall. He had built a logistics empire from a single truck in the 1960s, and even now, in his retirement, he commanded the room simply by breathing. He had been quiet for most of the meal, cutting his meat with surgical precision, his eyes darting between my father and my brother. I sliced a piece of potato, trying to make myself as small as possible. I hated these dinners. They felt like performance art where everyone knew their lines except me. I was the disappointment, the one who had not launched, the one who was still renting, the one who showed up in a dress from a thrift store that I hoped passed for vintage. "So, Reese," my mother chirped, her voice tight, "how is the job?" She always paused before the word job, as if she could not quite bring herself to say barista or data entry clerk without wincing. "It is fine, Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I picked up some extra shifts for the holidays. It pays the rent." "Rent?" Gavin chuckled, reaching for the wine bottle. "You are still throwing money away on rent? You know, the market is actually decent right now if you know where to look. Brielle and I just closed on that vacation rental in Asheville." "That is nice, Gavin," I said, forcing a smile. Not everyone has a down payment lying around. Brielle touched his arm, offering a sympathetic, patronizing smile. "Oh, Reese, you just have to prioritize. It is all about mindset." I gripped my fork harder. Mindset. Yes, if I just thought positively enough, my bank account would spontaneously generate 3 zeros. I was about to make an excuse to go to the bathroom, just to breathe some air that did not smell of judgment. But then the sound of silverware clattering against china silenced the room. It was not a polite clink, it was a slam. Grandfather Walter had dropped his knife and fork onto his plate. The noise rang out like a gunshot. He did not look at his food. He was looking directly at me. But his eyes were not disappointed. They were confused and angry. "Grandpa?" I asked, my voice small. Walter placed his hands flat on the table. His knuckles were white. "Reese," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the mahogany table. "Who is Miles Keaton?" The name hung in the air, foreign and heavy. I blinked. "Who?" "Miles Keaton," Walter repeated, louder this time. "I want to know why a man named Miles Keaton is currently listed as the managing director of the commercial properties I purchased for you 4 years ago." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I stared at him, my brain trying to process the sentence. "Properties?" I asked, letting out a nervous, breathless laugh. Grandpa, what are you talking about? I do not have any commercial properties. I do not have any properties at all. My car is not even fully paid off. Do not lie to me, Reese, Walter snapped. It was not malicious, but it was demanding. He was a man who dealt in facts, and he felt he was being played. I bought those warehouses in South End 4 years ago. I put them in a trust under your name. I set it up so you would have passive income to focus on your writing. I have been receiving reports for years that everything was stable. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at my mother. Marla was staring fixedly at the centerpiece of holly and ivy. Her jaw set so tight, I thought her teeth might crack. I looked at my father. Dean was suddenly very interested in the label of the wine bottle, peeling the corner of it with his thumbnail. Grandpa, I said, my voice shaking, but gaining clarity. I have never owned a warehouse. I have never received a check from a trust. I have spent the last 4 years working double shifts. I ate toast for dinner 3 nights last week. Dean, Walter barked, not turning his head, his eyes still locked on me. What is she talking about? My father jumped in his seat. Dad, please, Dean said, his voice pitching up an octave. It is Christmas. Let us not discuss business at the table. We can go over the portfolio next week. I am sure there is just some confusion. Confusion? Walter turned his gaze to his son-in-law. I received a phone call this morning. It was Christmas morning. Dean, a call from Arthur Penhaligon. You remember Arthur? He wanted to congratulate me on the new management. He said this Miles Keaton fellow is aggressive, that he is liquidating assets to fund a tech venture. Liquidating? I whispered. The word felt violent. It is a misunderstanding, Walter, my mother said quickly, reaching out to touch my grandfather's hand. He pulled it away as if she were burning him. You know how rumors are. Reese is just... She is overwhelmed. She probably forgot signing the papers. You know she is not good with details. I looked at my mother, stunned. Forgot? I asked. Mom, I think I would remember owning a commercial warehouse complex. I think I would remember not being poor. Gavin cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. Look, Grandpa, he started, putting on his best business school voice. Reese is right. She does not handle the day-to-day. We, the family, we helped structure things to protect her. Miles Keaton is just a consultant, a placeholder name for the LLC structure. It is standard practice. I watched Gavin's eyes. He was not looking at Walter. He was looking at Brielle. And Brielle was not looking at anyone. She was staring at her lap, her hands twisting her napkin into a tight, white rope. Her face was pale, the blush she had applied earlier standing out like a fever on her cheeks. A placeholder, Walter repeated, testing the word. So, a placeholder is selling my buildings? No one is selling anything, Dean said, too loud. He realized it and lowered his voice. Dad, Arthur is senile. He probably saw a similar name in the paper. We are handling Reese's future. We are protecting her. That is what we have always done. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table. A cold realization was starting to seep into my chest, replacing the shock. They were lying, all of them. They were sitting here, eating roast duck, drinking wine that probably cost more than my car payment, talking about protecting me, while I had been living on the edge of poverty for years. I decided to play the game. If I screamed, they would call me hysterical. They would say I was reacting emotionally, that I did not understand finance. I needed to be the confused, innocent daughter one last time. So, I said, keeping my voice soft, widening my eyes to look at my father. So, there really is a trust? For me? Dean let out a breath, thinking he saw an out. Yes, honey, of course. Grandpa was very generous. But it is complicated. Tax implications, asset management fees. We did not want to burden you with it until you were more established. We wanted to let it grow. And Miles Keaton? I asked, tilting my head. Is he helping it grow? Exactly, Marla said, nodding vigorously. He is a financial specialist. Gavin found him. He is just Optimizing the portfolio. Optimizing, I echoed. By liquidating it? That is just a rumor. Reese, Gavin snapped, his patience fraying. God, why do you always have to make everything a drama? We are doing you a favor. Do you have any idea how much work it is to manage a trust? You should be thanking us, not interrogating us. I looked at Gavin. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the way his leg was bouncing under the table, shaking the silverware ever so slightly. I am not interrogating, I said. I am just confused. Grandpa said this man is living on my future. That sounds scary. Gavin. Dad is exaggerating, Marla said, forcing a bright, terrifying smile. Let us have dessert. I bought that tart from the bakery you love. Reese? Walter did not move. He did not blink. He reached down to the floor, where his leather briefcase rested against the leg of his chair. The sound of the heavy brass zipper opening was the loudest thing in the world. It sounded like a zipper on a body bag. I do not want dessert, Walter said. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was bulging with papers. He did not toss it. He did not slide it. He raised it with both hands and placed it in the center of the table, right on top of the untouched holiday roast. Thud. The sound was heavy, final, and dull. It was the sound of a bomb that had just been armed. I did not believe Arthur, Walter said, his voice devoid of any warmth. So I had my office pull the records this afternoon. I had them faxed to the house an hour ago. He placed his hand on top of the envelope. This is not a rumor. Gavin, this is not optimization. Dean, and this is certainly not protection. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my family. The mask of the happy Christmas dinner had not just slipped, it had shattered. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. My father looked like a man who was looking for an exit sign, and Gavin looked like a child who had been caught standing over the broken vase. But I did not look away. I stared at the envelope. For the first time all night, I did not feel like the poor relation. I felt like the only person in the room who was about to find out exactly how much my life was actually worth. Open it, Walter said. He was looking at me. Open it, Reese, and tell me if you recognize the signature on the authorization forms. My grandfather did not wait for me to reach for the envelope. With a sharp, deliberate movement, he flipped the clasp open and slid the contents across the polished mahogany. The papers fanned out, overlapping like a hand of cards where every single option was a losing one for my family. They were not vague legal summaries. They were detailed tax filings, property deeds, and transfer of control documents. The ink was dark and crisp against the cream-colored paper. Right there, at the top of the summary page, was the entity name, the Holloway Trust, and directly below it, listed as the primary controlling officer with full power of attorney, was the name Miles Keaton. I stared at the name. It looked so official, so authorized. Gavin was out of his chair before I could even lean forward. He did not walk. He lunged. He snatched up the top sheet, his eyes scanning the text with a frantic, darting motion that betrayed him instantly. He let out a laugh, but it was a hollow, brittle sound that seemed to crack against the crystal glasses. Okay, I see what this is, Gavin said, tossing the paper back onto the table as if it were a dirty napkin. This is a clerical error. Grandpa, seriously, you know how the county clerk office is. They probably merged two files. There is likely a Miles Keaton who owns a dry cleaner in Gastonia, and some data entry intern mixed up the tax IDs. It happens all the time. He looked around the table, his smile wide and terrified, begging someone to agree with him. Exactly, my mother chimed in, her voice pitching up into that soothing, condescending tone she used when she wanted to pretend a problem did not exist. She reached out and placed her hand on Walter's forearm, squeezing it gently. Dad, listen to yourself. You just got back from Tokyo yesterday. You are exhausted. Jet lag does terrible things to the mind. You probably read a name in the in-flight magazine and got it confused with the paperwork. We can call the lawyers in the morning and clear up this whole silly mix-up. She was trying to turn him into a senile old man right in front of us. She was trying to rewrite reality because the truth was too dangerous to let live. My father, Dean, nodded vigorously, cutting a piece of meat he had no intention of eating. Marla is right. Walter, this is Christmas dinner. We should be talking about gratitude, not grilling everyone over a typo. Let us put the papers away. We can have a conference call on Tuesday, when everyone has had some sleep. Dean refused to look at the papers. He kept his eyes fixed on his wine glass, swirling the red liquid as if the answers were going to float to the surface. I sat there, frozen. I looked at the document Gavin had tossed down. It listed the asset value. $3.4 million. I blinked. I read it again. $3.4 million. My hands started to tremble, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt cold. I looked up at my family. They were all busy pretending this was a mistake, a joke, a fatigue-induced hallucination. $3 million, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through Gavin's nervous chuckling like a razor. It is a glitch, Reese, Gavin snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. Do not get excited. It is not real money. I drove here tonight on a spare tire, I said, lifting my head to look at him. My transmission slips every time I go over 40 miles an hour. Last month, I had to choose between paying my internet bill or buying groceries. So I spent 3 weeks stealing Wi-Fi from the coffee shop downstairs just to keep my second job. Reese, please, my mother hissed. We do not need to hear about your lifestyle choices right now. Lifestyle choices? I let out a sharp breath. I applied for a loan 6 months ago to fix my teeth, a $2,000 loan. The bank laughed at me. They said my debt-to-income ratio was laughable. I have been living on ramen and clearance rack bread for 4 years. I pointed a shaking finger at the paper on the table. And you are telling me that for those entire 4 years, I had a trust fund worth $3 million sitting in my name, and you let me live like that? The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of guilt. It was the heavy, suffocating air of people who knew exactly what they had done and were furious that they were being forced to look at it. We were protecting you, Dean mumbled, still looking at his wine. You know how you are with money, Reese. You are impulsive. We wanted to let the interest compound. We wanted to surprise you when you were ready. Ready? I asked. I was ready when I got evicted from my first apartment. I was ready when I could not afford health insurance and had to glue a cut on my hand shut with superglue. If this property is mine, if it is in my name, why did I not know? Why is a stranger named Miles Keaton signing checks instead of me? He is not a stranger, Gavin shouted, then immediately clamped his mouth shut. The room seemed to tilt. Walter did not yell. He did not pound the table again. He simply sat there, essentially a statue of judgment carved out of ice. He did not move the papers. He did not take them back. He left them right there in the center of the feast, a physical manifestation of their betrayal sitting between the cranberry sauce and the gravy boat. Gavin, Walter said softly, you just said it was a clerical error. You said he was a stranger from Gastonia. I meant he is not a stranger to the firm. Gavin stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. He is a consultant, a risk management guy. We brought him in to shield Reese from liability. If the market crashed, we did not want her credit score to take the hit. It is a complex financial vehicle. Grandpa, you are retired. You do not know how the modern markets work anymore. I know how theft works, Walter said. My mother let out a sob, a sharp, theatrical sound. Oh, for heaven's sake! This is ridiculous. We are a family. We love Reese. We would never take anything from her. I cannot believe you are accusing us of this in front of the children. My blood pressure cannot take this. Dad! She fanned herself with her hand, looking at me with wet, pleading eyes. Reese, honey, tell your grandfather to stop. Tell him you trust us. Tell him we have always taken care of you. I looked at her. I looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. It probably cost more than my entire year's salary. I looked at Gavin's custom suit. I looked at Brielle, who was staring at the tablecloth as if she wished she could dissolve into the fabric. "I cannot do that, Mom," I said. My mother's face hardened instantly. The mask of the victim dropped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "You ungrateful little girl," she whispered. The air in the room was gone. No one was eating. The expensive roast duck sat congealing on the plates. The sound of a fork scraping against a plate earlier seemed like a distant memory. Now, the only sound was the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away the seconds of their credibility. Walter leaned back in his chair. He looked at his son, his daughter, his grandson. He looked at them with a profound, terrifying disappointment. "I built this family on honor," Walter said, "and I sit here tonight surrounded by thieves." "Dad, stop it," Dean said, his voice trembling. "Let us put the papers away. We will sort it out Monday. Just put them away." "They stay on the table," Walter commanded. I watched Gavin. He had stopped talking. He had run out of lies. Or perhaps he was just realizing that none of them were working. His hand was resting on the table, next to his plate. He was holding his linen napkin. His knuckles were white. He was squeezing the fabric so hard his fingers were turning purple. He was twisting it, strangling it, as if he were trying to wring the truth out of existence. He stared at the name Miles Keaton on the paper, and in his eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than his anger. I saw recognition. He knew exactly who Miles Keaton was, and he was terrified that I was about to find out too. My father, Dean, exhaled a long, heavy sigh that seemed to deflate his entire posture. He set his wineglass down with a deliberate slowness, the kind of movement a man makes when he is trying to buy himself 3 seconds to formulate a life raft out of thin air. He looked at Walter, then at me, his expression softening into a look of pained, misunderstood benevolence. It was a look I knew well. It was the face he wore when he missed my high school graduation because of a golf tournament, or when he forgot my birthday and blamed it on his secretary. "Walter," Dean began, his voice dropping to a register of reasonable, adult concern. "Let us take a step back. We are getting hung up on terminology here. We are getting hung up on shock value. But we are ignoring the context. The context is everything." He gestured toward me with an open palm, a motion that felt less like an invitation and more like an indictment. "Think back to 4 years ago. Reese, just think back. You were 25. You had just quit that internship. You were drifting. You were talking about moving to the city to become a writer, with no savings, no plan, no safety net. You were vulnerable." I stared at him. "I was working," I said quietly. "I was not drifting. I was working 2 jobs. "You were struggling," Dean corrected gently, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "And Grandpa came to us with this incredibly generous idea. He wanted to secure your future. He bought those assets. But Marla and I, we had a hard conversation. We looked at the reality. If we handed a portfolio of that size to a 25-year-old girl with 0 financial literacy, what would happen?" He paused for effect, looking around the table to gather consensus. "You would have been eaten alive." He answered his own question. "Sharks, scammers, bad investments, or worse, you would have lost your drive. You would have become one of those trust fund kids who never accomplishes anything. We wanted you to build character first. We wanted you to learn the value of $1. So you hid $3 million from me to teach me character?" I asked. My voice trembled, and for once, I did not have to fake the emotion. When my car broke down last winter and I had to walk 3 miles to work in the snow, was that part of the lesson plan? Was that character building, Dad? "It made you tough," my mother interjected. Marla leaned forward, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She was good. She was so incredibly good at weaponizing her own emotions. "Reese, honey, you have to understand. We were terrified for you. You are so open. You wear your heart on your sleeve. If people knew you had that kind of money, they would use you. Men would use you. Friends would borrow money and never pay it back. We were acting as a shield." She reached across the table, her fingers hovering near my hand but not quite touching it, likely afraid I might bite. We took on the burden of managing it, Marla continued, her voice trembling. Do you think it was easy? Dealing with tax codes, insurance, maintenance? We did that for you. We kept it quiet so you could live a normal life. We were just temporarily managing things until you settled down, until you were married, until you had someone someone stable to help you. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. There it was, the caveat. I was not capable of owning my own life until I was married, until I was property of someone else. Temporarily, I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. You said temporarily, so, for 4 years, you have just been, what, babysitting the buildings? Exactly, Gavin jumped in. He seemed relieved that the narrative had shifted from theft to overprotective parenting. He loosened his tie, looking a little more like his arrogant self. It is called a custodial arrangement. Reese, it is standard stuff. We hold the operational power of attorney. We handle the headaches. You get the benefit eventually. No one sold anything. No one stole anything. We just put a layer of management in place to make sure the assets did not depreciate while you were finding yourself. I looked at Brielle. My sister-in-law had not said a word. She had not touched her wine. She was staring at a spot on the tablecloth near the gravy boat, her face pale and rigid. She knew. I could see it in the way she refused to make eye contact with me. She knew that finding myself was code for starving, and she knew that management was code for something much darker. Brielle, I said softly. She flinched. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide and terrified. Do you think I needed to be shielded? I asked her. Do you think I was too stupid to know I had money? Brielle started, her voice cracking. She looked at Gavin, then at Dean. She saw the warning in their eyes. She swallowed hard. I think families do complicated things to protect each other. Reese, I think they just wanted you to be safe. It was a non-answer. It was a coward's answer. But it confirmed everything I needed to know. She was complicit by silence. I turned back to my grandfather. Walter had not moved. He had let them spin this web of benevolent deception, watching them hang themselves with every sentence. He tapped his index finger on the stack of papers. That is a very touching story, Dean, Walter said. His voice was dry, devoid of any moisture or warmth. It almost sounds plausible, except for one small detail. He flipped the cover page of the document over to reveal the second sheet. This is not a management agreement. This is not a custodial oversight document. This is a transfer of control and beneficiary rights. Walter looked at Gavin, his eyes narrowing. You said you were babysitting the assets. You said you were holding the door open, but this document says you changed the locks. This says that the Reese Holloway Trust no longer lists Reese Holloway as the primary beneficiary. It lists a holding company, and the director of that holding company is Miles Keaton. The air left the room again. The protective parent's narrative shattered instantly against the hard rock of legal reality. That is just structure, Gavin blurted out, his voice pitchy. Grandpa, you are reading it wrong. It is a corporate shell. We move the assets into a shell to lower the tax liability. It is a common strategy. You have to update the beneficiary to the shell company to flow the income through. It is a technicality. It is an administrative update. An administrative update, I said, keeping my voice low, injecting a tone of innocent confusion. So, this Miles Keaton person, he is just a name on a piece of paper? He does not actually have the power to sell my future? No, of course not, Dean said, wiping his upper lip with a napkin. He is a fiduciary. He works for us. For you. He cannot do anything without family approval. Then why did Grandpa get a call saying he was selling? I asked. I told you that was a mistake, Marla cried out. A rumor. Probably a competitor trying to stir up trouble. Why are you choosing to believe a stranger over your own mother? Because the stranger is not the one who let me work double shifts on Christmas Eve last year to pay for a root canal, I said. The sentence landed hard. Marla recoiled as if I had slapped her. I am trying to understand, I continued, pushing just a little harder, dragging the shovel deeper into the hole they were digging. If this is all just a structure, and if Miles Keaton is just a helper, why is his name on the deed? Why is his name on the tax return? And why, when I look at this paper, I leaned forward and pointed to a line item halfway down the page. Why does it say that Miles Keaton has full signatory authority without board oversight? Gavin froze. He had not realized I could read a contract that fast. Or perhaps he had assumed I was too artistically minded to understand what signatory authority meant. That is a standard clause, Gavin muttered, but the fight was draining out of him. It is for agility, so we do not have to have a family meeting every time we need to fix a roof or sign a lease. Agility, Walter repeated. That is a new word for theft. It is not theft, Gavin slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. We are saving this family. Do you have any idea how much pressure we are under? The market is down. The logistics business is bleeding. We needed liquidity. We needed to leverage the assets to keep the wider portfolio afloat. We were going to pay it back. We were going to put it all back before Reese even knew it was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Gavin stopped breathing. He realized what he had just said. He had just admitted it. He had admitted they were using my money, my future, to plug the holes in their own sinking ship. Dean closed his eyes. Marla let out a small, high-pitched whimper. I looked at Gavin. So you were borrowing it? I asked, without asking. We were fixing things, Gavin insisted, his eyes wild. We are a family. We share the burden. You were not using it. It was just sitting there. We put it to work. You put it to work for Miles Keaton, Walter said. Walter picked up the document again. He held it up to the light of the chandelier. Gavin, Walter said. His voice was no longer angry. It was something worse. It was clinical. You keep saying we. You keep talking about structures and strategies. But there is one thing on this document that we have not discussed yet. He lowered the paper and looked directly at his grandson. To authorize a transfer of this magnitude, to move a trust into a shell company, the original beneficiary has to sign off. Reese has to sign. She has to physically sign the paper in the presence of a notary. I looked at Gavin. His face had gone the color of ash. I never signed anything, I said clearly. I know you did not, Walter said. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes locked on Gavin. Because on the date this document was executed, Reese was in the hospital with pneumonia. I remember because I sent flowers. She was sedated. Walter leaned forward. The predator was closing in on the prey. So, Gavin? Walter asked, his voice a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. I want you to look at me and answer one question. Did you sign any piece of paper that had your sister's name on it? Gavin looked at the table, his eyes darting between the silver salt shaker and his own trembling hands. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, demanding an answer that would inevitably sever the last thread of his credibility. I signed, Gavin whispered. His voice was so low I almost missed it. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently against his collar. I signed some administrative papers, okay? That is all it was. Mom and Dad brought them to me. They said the lawyers needed a signature to process the insurance renewal for the buildings, and you were unavailable. They said you were working, or you were out of town, and if we did not sign by 5 o'clock that day, the coverage would lapse. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a lifeline I did not have. It was a limited power of attorney. Reese, he insisted, his voice gaining a desperate kind of speed. Just for operational maintenance, just so we could pay the landscapers and the security firm without having to track you down every single time a bill came in. It was practical. It was not malicious. You signed my name? I asked. I signed for you, Gavin corrected, clinging to the semantics like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. I signed as an authorized agent. Mom said it was fine. Dad said it was standard procedure in family holding companies. Walter did not respond to Gavin's explanation. He did not look surprised. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his dinner jacket and pulled out a cell phone. He pressed a single button and held it to his ear. The room was so quiet that I could hear the faint electronic ringtone on the other end. "Bring it in," Walter said. He hung up and placed the phone on the table next to the envelope. "Dad, who are you calling?" Marla asked, her voice shrill. "We are having a family discussion. We do not need outsiders involved." "We are past the point of a family discussion, Marla," Walter said calmly. "We are now in the discovery phase." Before my mother could object again, the heavy oak doors of the dining room opened. A woman stepped inside. She was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun, and she carried a black briefcase with silver clasps. I recognized her immediately. Fallon Reddick. She was the most terrifying corporate litigator in Charlotte. She had handled my grandfather's estate planning for 2 decades, and rumor had it she could dismantle a merger deal just by raising an eyebrow. She did not look like she was here for Christmas pudding. "Good evening. Mr. Grayson," she said. Her voice was cool, professional, and utterly devoid of holiday cheer. She nodded briefly at the rest of us, her gaze sweeping over my parents like a scanner reading a barcode. "Ms. Reddick," Walter said, gesturing to the empty space at the end of the table. "Please, show them." Fallon Reddick did not sit. She walked to the head of the table and placed the briefcase on the sideboard. The sound of the metallic latches snapping open was sharp and precise. She pulled out a single, protected document sleeve and placed it gently in front of me. "Ms. Holloway," Fallon said, addressing me directly, "I need you to look at this document, specifically the signature line at the bottom of page 4. I looked down. It was a general durable power of attorney document. It granted full, unrestricted authority to Miles Keaton to act on my behalf in all financial and legal matters. And there, at the bottom, was my name, Reese A. Holloway. The signature was executed in blue ink. It looped and curved exactly the way I wrote my name. The tail of the Y swooped down and crossed back over, just like mine did. If I had seen this on a receipt or a sign-in sheet, I would have assumed I had written it myself. "It looks like my signature," I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Look at the date," Fallon instructed. I scanned the top of the document. October 14th, 2021. My head snapped up. "That is impossible." "Why is it impossible?" Fallon asked. She already knew the answer. She was just leading me through the steps so everyone else could hear it. "October 14th, I repeated. That was a Thursday. I remember that day perfectly. I was working a double shift at the convention center. It was the tech summit. I clocked in at 6 in the morning and I did not leave the floor until 11 at night. They took our phones at the door because of the security clearance for the keynote speakers. I could not have signed a legal document in a lawyer's office. I was serving coffee to venture capitalists for 14 hours straight. "Exactly," Fallon said. She reached into her folder and pulled out a second sheet. It was a blown-up, high-resolution image of the signature on the document, placed next to a sample of my actual signature from a birthday card I had given my grandfather 3 years ago. "To the untrained eye, these look identical," Fallon said, her voice taking on the lecture tone of a professor teaching a class on fraud. "Gavin is a talented artist. He always has been. He captured the visual rhythm of your handwriting quite well. However, forgery is not just about shape. It is about pressure and speed." She pointed to the top curve of the R in the questioned signature. When a person signs their own name, it is muscle memory. It is a fluid, continuous motion. But when a person forges a signature, they are drawing, not writing. They have to look at the reference. They hesitate. She tapped a tiny, almost invisible blot of ink at the top of the letter. "This is called a pen lift. The writer stopped here for a fraction of a second to check the angle of the curve. You can see the ink pool slightly where the ballpoint rested too long. And here." She pointed to the S in Reese. "The slant changes by 4 degrees. Your natural handwriting leans forward at a consistent 55-degree angle. This letter stands up straighter. It indicates the writer was right-handed but trying to mimic the flow of a left-handed writer, or simply holding their hand at an unnatural angle to avoid smudging. Gavin was staring at the blow-up image, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a magician who had just had his trick revealed by a slow-motion camera. "That is ridiculous," Dean sputtered, trying to regain control of the room. "You are analyzing microscopic ink dots? It was 4 years ago. Maybe the pen was faulty. Maybe Reese was tired when she signed it. You cannot prove forgery based on a pen lift." "You are right," Fallon said smoothly. "Handwriting analysis can be subjective in court, which is why we did not stop there." She reached into the briefcase again. This time, she pulled out a sheet of paper that looked like a technical diagnostic report. It was filled with rows of numbers and codes. "Every modern laser printer places a series of microscopic yellow dots on every page it prints," Fallon explained. "It is a machine identification code. It tells us the serial number of the printer and, more importantly, the exact date and time the document was printed." She slid the report toward my father. "The document on the table is dated October 14th, 2021. However, the forensic analysis of the paper itself tells a different story. These pages were printed on a Hewlett-Packard LaserJet Enterprise, serial number ending in 459. That printer is located in the home office of this house, and the timestamp encoded in the yellow dots indicates this document was printed on December 3rd, 2024. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. "December 3rd, I whispered. "That was 3 weeks ago." Fallon nodded. "Correct. This document is not 4 years old. It is 22 days old. It was backdated. Someone printed this document 3 weeks ago, signed Reese's name to it, and then filed it into the records to make it look like this arrangement had been in place for years." "It is a copy," Marla shouted, standing up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "It is just a reprint. We lost the original. We lost the original in the move when we renovated the office last year. We recreated it for the files so the audit would be clean. That is all it is. We were just trying to keep the paperwork organized." Recreating a legal document, signing someone else's name to it, and dating it in the past is not organizing paperwork. "Marla," Fallon said cold, "it is fraud. It is falsifying records. And when that document is used to authorize the transfer of assets, it becomes a felony." "We did not use it for that," Dean insisted, his face pale and sweaty. "It was just for the files, just a placeholder." Fallon ignored him. She turned back to me. Her expression softened just a fraction, the professional mask slipping enough to show a hint of grim sympathy. "There are too many red flags to ignore. Reese," she said, "the pen lifts, the printer data, the fact that on the day this was supposedly signed, you were on camera at the convention center. I have already pulled the security footage from the venue to confirm your alibi." She looked at Gavin, then at my parents. "This is airtight," she said. "There is no version of this story where a judge believes this signature is legitimate." I looked at the paper again, my name, my identity, stolen, copied, and pasted onto a lie. They had not just taken my money, they had taken my voice. They had made me agree to things I never knew existed. They had made me an accomplice in my own robbery. I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It was the calmness of someone who realizes the worst has already happened, so there is nothing left to fear. I looked up at Gavin. He was not looking at the lawyer anymore. He was looking at his wife, Brielle, with a look of pure panic. "If the signature is fake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "and if you printed it 3 weeks ago—" I paused, letting the logic connect in my mind. "You would only need to forge a 4-year-old authority document if you needed to prove you had permission to do something massive right now. You needed to show a paper trail that did not exist." I looked directly at my father. "If this signature isn't mine," I asked, "what did you use it for? What did you just buy or sell 3 weeks ago that required my permission from 4 years back?" The silence in the dining room was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized by the undeniable evidence of the backdated signature lying on the table, but Fallon Reddick was not finished. She did not close her briefcase. She did not step back. Instead, she reached into the leather depths of her bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was thinner, bound in a dark blue cover, and it did not look like financial records. It looked like a collection of correspondence. "The money," Fallon said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "is a significant issue. Grand larceny and forgery usually are. But when Mr. Grayson asked me to investigate why his granddaughter was living paycheck to paycheck despite a multi-million-dollar trust, the math did not add up, even without access to the trust. A woman with your degree, your portfolio, and your grades should have been able to secure gainful employment that offered more than minimum wage." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "I tried," I said, my voice hollow. "I applied to dozens of places. I got interviews. I never got the offer. The market is tough." "The market is competitive, yes," Fallon agreed. "But it is not that tough. Not for someone who graduated summa cum laude." She opened the blue folder. Inside were stacks of printed emails. "We ran a forensic sweep of your digital footprint, Reese, and we found a pattern. Every time you reached the final round of interviews for a significant position, the junior editor role in Chicago, the copywriting lead in Austin, the communications director job right here in Charlotte, the hiring manager received an unsolicited email just days before the final decision was made." Fallon slid a piece of paper toward me. It was a printout of an email sent to the HR director of the publishing house in Chicago that had rejected me 2 years ago. I remembered that rejection. I had cried for 3 days. I had thought I wasn't good enough. I read the text. Subject: regarding candidate Reese Holloway, to whom it may concern, as a former colleague who wishes to remain anonymous, I feel obligated to warn you about Miss Holloway's professional conduct. While talented, she has a documented history of emotional instability and causing significant internal drama. She is litigious and unreliable under pressure. Proceed with caution. I stared at the words. Emotional instability, litigious, unreliable. "This," I choked out, my hand trembling as I touched the paper. "This is a lie. I have never sued anyone. I have never caused drama. Who sent this?" "The email address is a burner account," Fallon said. "Securemail.com, untraceable on the surface, but whoever sent it made a mistake. They logged into the burner account to send these emails without using a VPN." She placed a technical report on top of the email. "We traced the IP address of the sender. The emails were sent from a residential IP address registered to a Spectrum account in Charlotte." Fallon looked up, her gaze landing squarely on the man sitting across from me. "They were sent from this house." The air left my lungs. I looked at my family, the people who had hugged me when I didn't get the job, the people who had told me that everything happens for a reason, that maybe I just wasn't ready for the big city, that I should stay close to home where I was safe. "You sent this?" I whispered. I looked at Gavin. He was shaking his head, his eyes wide and wet, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his mother. "I told you," Gavin stammered, his voice rising in panic. "I told you they would trace it. I said we should use the library computer, but you said it was paranoid." "Shut up, Gavin!" Marla shrieked. Her face was no longer the composed mask of the matriarch. It was twisted, ugly, with fear and desperation. "No, I will not shut up." Gavin stood up, his chair tipping backward and crashing onto the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at our mother. "You made me write them. I did not even know who the hiring managers were. You went through her room. You found her application notes, and you gave me the email addresses. You told me what to write. You said if she got the job in Chicago, she would leave us." "Gavin!" Dean roared, slamming his hand on the table. "Don't put this on me, Dean," Gavin shouted back, turning on our father. "You proofread them. You told me to add the part about her being litigious because companies hate legal risks. You said it was the only way to kill the offer for sure." I sat there, frozen. The room was spinning. "You," I looked at my mother. "You sabotaged me?" Marla began to cry. It wasn't a soft, sympathetic cry. It was a wailing, hysterical sound. She reached out toward me across the table, knocking over a wine glass. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain spreading between us. I did it for you, Marla sobbed. Reese, honey, you do not understand. Chicago is so far away. It is dangerous. You are not street smart. You are fragile. I knew if you went out there, you would get chewed up. You would be all alone in a cold city with no family. I was 26 years old, I said, my voice shaking. I was an adult. I wanted that job. It was my dream job. It was a mistake, Marla insisted, clutching her chest. I was protecting you. A mother knows what her child can handle. You think you are strong, but you are not. You need us. You need your family. I just wanted to keep you here where I could look after you. Is it a crime to love your daughter too much? It is not love, I said, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. It was a cold tear. You made me believe I was worthless. For 2 years. I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought I was unhireable. I doubted every single talent I had because of you. We just wanted you to stay, Dean said. His voice was quieter, trying to regain the reasonable ground, but it was too late. Reese, look at it from our perspective. The family needs to stay together. If you moved away, the dynamic would break. And, well, we needed you here. You needed me here, I repeated. Why? To sign papers you forged? To use my identity as a shield for your debts? No, Brielle spoke up. We all turned to look at her. Brielle was still sitting, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were yellow. She looked at Gavin with disgust, then at Marla with something bordering on hatred. They needed you here because you are the collateral, Brielle said softly. Brielle, shut your mouth, Gavin hissed. I will not, Brielle said. She looked at me. I saw him. Reese, I walked into the study one night about 2 years ago. Gavin was typing on the laptop. He was laughing. He read me the draft of the email he was sending to that tech firm in Austin, the one that was going to pay you $80,000 a year. I remembered that one. I had already looked at apartments online. He told me it was brilliant, Brielle continued, her voice trembling. He said if you got that job, you would have financial independence. And if you had financial independence, you would hire your own accountant. And if you hired your own accountant, they would find the trust. The truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just about keeping me close because they missed me. It wasn't just about some twisted maternal need to baby me. It was tactical. It was a siege. You had to keep me poor, I said, the realization washing over me. You had to keep me failing, because if I succeeded, if I had my own money, I would not need you. And if I did not need you, I would find out what you stole. Dean looked away. Marla buried her face in her hands. Gavin just stood there, panting, looking like a man who had burned down his own house to kill a spider. We gave you a job, Dean argued weakly. I offered you a position at the logistics firm. You turned it down. Because I wanted to make my own way, I yelled. It was the first time I had raised my voice. And you punished me for it. You punished me for trying to be independent. I looked at the emails spread out on the table. The dates spanned 3 years. 3 years of my life. 3 years of rejections, of crying in my car, of feeling like a failure, of wondering what was wrong with me. And the whole time, the answer was sitting at this dining table, passing me the potatoes and asking why I hadn't found a real job yet. You stole my career, I said. You stole my confidence. I looked at Marla. You watched me cry. Mom, when I got that rejection letter from Chicago, I came to your house and I cried on your shoulder. You hugged me. You told me it was their loss. Marla looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. It was their loss, she whispered. I was just trying to be a good mother. A good mother, I said, does not clip her child's wings and then blame her for not flying. I turned to Walter. My grandfather was sitting very still. His face was gray. He looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the meal. He looked at the emails. He looked at the forged signature. He looked at the son and daughter he had raised. I thought it was greed, Walter said quietly. He looked at Dean. He looked at Marla. I thought you just wanted the money. I thought you were just desperate and weak. Walter stood up slowly. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a final sentence. But this, he pointed a shaking finger at the blue folder. This is not greed. This is cruelty. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a sorrow so deep it hurt to look at him. I accused them of theft, Walter said to me. I was wrong. He turned back to my parents and my brother. You did not just sell her assets. You sold her life. You sold her future. You watched her struggle, and you kept her under your boot so you could keep living in this house and pretending you were successful. Walter reached for the phone again. Grandpa, what are you doing? Gavin asked, his voice trembling with terror. I am calling the police back, Walter said. I told them to stand by for a theft report, but I need to amend that. I need to tell them that I am also reporting a conspiracy. The name Miles Keaton hung in the air like smoke, a phantom that had been haunting my financial records for years without my knowledge. My grandfather, Walter, did not seem interested in chasing ghosts anymore. He was interested in catching the people sitting right in front of him. You asked who Miles Keaton is, Walter said, his voice level and dangerously calm. He nodded to Fallon Reddick. Show them the transfer of control agreement again, Fallon, but this time, show them the signature page for Mr. Keaton. Fallon moved with the precision of a surgeon. She flipped the document on the table, revealing the bottom half of the final page. There, on the line designated for the managing director, was a signature. It read, Miles Keaton. Now, Fallon said, reaching into her briefcase for a transparent acetate sheet, let us look at something interesting. She placed the transparency over the document. On the plastic sheet was a copy of my brother Gavin's signature, taken from a mortgage application he had filed 2 years ago. Fallon lined them up. The room went silent. The loop of the M in Miles perfectly matched the loop of the G in Gavin. The sharp, aggressive slash of the T in Keaton was identical to the way Gavin crossed the N in his own last name. It was not just similar. It was a forensic match. The muscle memory of the hand that wrote it was undeniable. Gavin, Fallon said, her voice devoid of emotion. You did not just forge Reese's name to give power to a stranger. You invented the stranger. Miles Keaton does not exist. Miles Keaton is you. Gavin made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He pulled his hands off the table as if the mahogany had suddenly turned red hot. It is a pseudonym, Gavin stammered, his eyes darting frantically between me and our grandfather. It is a standard business practice. Authors use pen names. Developers use LLCs. I needed a distinct entity to keep the book separate. It was not malicious. It was for organizational clarity. Organizational clarity, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the lie. So you pretended to be a separate person so you could sell my assets to yourself? No, Dean interjected, leaning forward, his face slick with perspiration. Reese, you do not understand corporate structure. The accountants set this up. We just followed their advice. They sent over a packet of documents. We signed where the little sticky arrows told us to sign. We did not read every single line of the fine print. If there is an overlap in signatures, it is probably just muscle fatigue. Or maybe the notary got confused. The accountants, Fallon repeated flatly. She pulled another sheet of paper from her stack. It was a bank statement. That is an interesting theory, Dean, because if this was just a clerical error by a third-party accounting firm, I am curious why the proceeds from the liquidation of the South End warehouse did not go to an escrow account. She slid the paper across the table. It stopped right in front of my mother. This is a wire transfer record from 3 weeks ago, Fallon said. Amount? $550,000. Origin? The Miles Keaton Holding Group. Destination? A joint checking account at Bank of America ending in 4429. Fallon looked at my parents. That is your personal account, isn't it, Marla? My mother stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The color had drained from her face so completely that her rouge looked like war paint on a corpse. $500,000, I whispered. I thought about my rent, which was overdue. I thought about the winter coat I had stitched up because I could not afford a new one. I thought about the time I had fainted at work because I had skipped lunch to save $5. Reese, Dean said, his voice cracking, listen to me. It is not what it looks like. It looks like you sold my building and put $500,000 in your pocket, I said. I kept my voice soft, confused, playing the part of the daughter who just wanted to understand. I knew if I screamed, they would shut down. If I played the victim, they would keep explaining, and every explanation would be a confession. Why, Dad? Why did you need it? Was it for the business? Yes. Dean seized on the excuse like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Yes, exactly. The logistics firm. We hit a rough patch, a cash flow issue, supply chain problems in the Pacific. We just needed a bridge loan. That is all this was. We were going to pay it back next month, with interest. We were going to give you a bonus. A bridge loan, I said. So the business is failing? It is not failing, Gavin shouted, too quickly. It is just leveraged. He is lying, a voice said from the side of the table. We all turned. It was Brielle. My sister-in-law was shaking. She had finished her glass of wine in one gulp and was now gripping the stem so hard I thought it would snap. Brielle, shut up, Gavin hissed. I am not going to jail for you, Gavin, Brielle said, her voice trembling but gaining volume. She looked at me. Reese, it is not the business. The logistics firm is fine. It is Dean. She pointed a shaking finger at my father. He has been gambling on futures, high-risk currency trading. He lost nearly $200,000 last quarter, and then he tried to cover it with a loan from a private lender. The kind you do not find at a bank. The kind that breaks legs. Dean's face went gray. Brielle, that is private family business. It became Reese's business when you stole her inheritance to pay off your bookie, Brielle screamed. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. He was desperate. Reese, the deadline was the 1st of January. He told us if he did not come up with the cash, they were going to come after the house. They were going to come after everything. He said he just needed to borrow your asset to save the family. Borrow, I said, feeling a cold numbness spreading through my chest. You call selling my future borrowing? We were going to fix it, Gavin cried out, standing up again, his hands waving frantically. I had a plan. Reese, I was going to invest the remainder of the cash in a tech startup. It was a sure thing. We were going to double the money in 6 months, pay back the trust, and you would never have known. We were trying to save Dad without hurting you. So the sale was temporary? I asked, looking at the documents. You sold the building temporarily? Yes, no, I mean, Gavin faltered, realizing the stupidity of his own words. The sale was real, but the intent was temporary. We were just moving the equity around. You cannot sell a building temporarily, Gavin, Walter said. My grandfather spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. His voice was not loud, but it silenced the room instantly. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands folded over the head of his cane. He looked at his son, Dean, with a gaze that was not angry, but entirely devoid of recognition. It was as if he were looking at a stranger who had broken into his home. You gambled, Walter said to Dean, and when you lost, you decided that your daughter's safety was the price of your incompetence. Dad, I was backed into a corner, Dean pleaded, tears finally spilling over. What was I supposed to do? Let them take the house? Let them ruin our reputation? I am the CEO. I could not file for bankruptcy. So you bankrupted her instead, Walter said, tilting his head toward me. We sheltered her, Marla sobbed. She is young. She has time to make money. We are old. Walter, we cannot start over. We did what we had to do to survive. Survive, Walter repeated the word, tasting it. He looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was 9 o'clock. You talk about survival as if it is a game, Walter said. You talk about deadlines and loans and hiding things. He slowly stood up, He was an old man, but in that moment, he looked like a titan. He reached for the heavy envelope on the table, the one he had put down at the very beginning of the night, and pulled out one final, single sheet of paper. "You thought you were clever," Walter said to Gavin. "You thought that because I was old, and because Reese was trusting, you could move pieces around the board in the dark. You thought that by backdating a document to 4 years ago, you could create a reality that suited you." He slid the paper toward Gavin. "But you forgot one thing about me, grandson. I did not build an empire by letting people lie to me." Gavin looked at the paper. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. "What is this?" Gavin whispered. "I asked enough questions tonight," Walter said. "I let you spin your stories. I let you blame the accountants. I let you blame the notaries. I let you reveal exactly how deep the rot goes." Walter walked around the table until he was standing behind my chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was warm and solid, the only real thing in a room full of smoke and mirrors. "You see," Walter said, looking down at Dean and Marla, "you assumed that I stopped paying attention to Reese's trust 4 years ago. You assumed that because I gave you the authority to manage it, I walked away." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "But 6 months ago, I had a feeling, a grandfather's intuition, so I made a change I did not tell you about, a change that makes every single document you forged, every wire transfer you sent, and every sale you executed, completely illegal in a way you did not anticipate." Dean looked at the paper in front of Gavin. He squinted, trying to read the text upside down. "What did you do?" Dean whispered. "Tell them, Reese," Walter said, squeezing my shoulder. "Tell them what date is on that paper." I looked at the document. It was a revocation of power of attorney. "June 1st, 2025, I read aloud. "That is right," Walter said. "6 months ago, I quietly removed all of you from the trust. I transferred the ultimate controlling interest to a blind auditor. Any action taken by the family after June 1st required a countersignature from that auditor." He looked at Gavin, whose face was now a mask of pure horror. "You forged Reese's signature to authorize the sale 3 weeks ago, but you did not forge the auditor's signature because you did not know he existed." Walter smiled, but it was a smile that promised ruin. "Which means, Gavin, you did not just commit fraud against your sister. You committed fraud against a federally regulated audit firm, and they do not just sue for damages." Walter checked his watch. "They press charges." As if on cue, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway outside, then another, then the heavy, authoritative thud of boots on the front porch steps. "I believe," Walter said, looking at the door, "that is the timeline catching up with you. The revelation that my grandfather had installed a blind auditor 6 months ago hung over the table like a guillotine blade that had already dropped, but hadn't yet hit the neck. The room was silent, save for the ragged breathing of my brother, Gavin, who was staring at the revocation document as if it were his own death warrant. But Walter was not finished. He did not sit down. He remained standing at the head of the table, his silhouette imposing against the dark paneling of the dining room. "You are thinking about the $500,000, Walter said, his voice cutting through the heavy air. He looked at Dean, then at Marla. "You are thinking about the prison time. You are thinking about the scandal. But you are short-sighted. You have always been short-sighted." He signaled to Fallon Reddick. "The audit was the trap," Walter said. "But this is the consequence." Fallon reached into her briefcase for the 3rd time. The sound of the leather sliding against the wood was the only noise in the room. She pulled out a document bound in heavy cream-colored cardstock, sealed with a red wax stamp that looked archaic and terrifyingly official. "My last will and testament," Walter announced. My mother, Marla, let out a small, strangled gasp. Her eyes widened, locking onto the document with a hunger that was almost feral. For as long as I could remember, the unspoken religion of this family had been the inheritance. It was the promise that kept Dean from panicking about his bad investments. It was the safety net that allowed Marla to buy designer clothes she could not afford. They tolerated Walter's strictness because they knew, eventually, the empire would be theirs. I updated this document on the same day I hired the auditor, Walter said. June 1st, 2025. Fallon placed the document in the center of the table, directly over the scattered evidence of their fraud. Mr. Grayson, Fallon said, her voice projecting with professional clarity, has revoked all previous wills and codicils. Under the previous arrangement, the estate was to be divided 40% to Marla Grayson Holloway, 40% to Gavin Holloway, and 20% to Reese Holloway, with Dean Holloway acting as executor. Dean flinched. He looked at the document as if it were physically burning him. That arrangement is null and void, Fallon continued. She flipped the page to the final section. Under the terms of the new will, the entirety of the Grayson estate, including the logistics firm, the real estate portfolio, the liquid assets, and this property we are sitting in tonight, is bequeathed to a single beneficiary. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. Reese Alexandra Holloway. The silence that followed was not empty. It was violent. It was the sound of 3 lifetimes of entitlement shattering all at once. Dean turned a color I had never seen on a human face, a blend of gray and green. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing. He wasn't just realizing he was going to jail for fraud. He was realizing that the golden parachute he had been waiting for his entire life had just been set on fire. Marla stared at her father. "Dad," she whispered, "you cannot mean that. The whole estate? Everything? But we are your family. I am your daughter." "You are my daughter," Walter agreed, his voice cold. "And you stood by while your husband and son cannibalized your own child. You watched Reese struggle to buy groceries while you sat on a secret fortune. You did not act like a mother, Marla. You acted like an accomplice." "She tricked you!" The scream came from Gavin. He slammed his hands onto the table, knocking over his water glass. The water spread across the tablecloth, soaking into the forged documents, but no one moved to clean it up. "She played you!" Gavin yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. His face was twisted, ugly with panic and hate. "Look at her, sitting there so quiet. She planned this. She has been playing the victim for years just to make us look bad. She probably tipped off the auditor herself." I looked at my brother. I looked at the man who had bought a vacation home while I was eating instant noodles. I looked at the man who had forged my name to save his own skin. "I did not know about the auditor." "Gavin," I said. My voice was calm. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this scene through a glass wall. "I did not know about the will until tonight. I did not even know I had anything to steal." "Liar," Gavin shrieked. "You poisoned him against us. You want it all for yourself. You greedy little—" "Enough," Walter said. He did not shout. He simply dropped the word like a gavel. "Reese did not ask for this," Walter said, looking at Gavin with disdain. "She did not ask for the money. She did not ask for the help. She simply tried to survive the obstacles you placed in her path, and that is why she is worthy of the legacy, because she knows how to build something from nothing. You, Gavin, you only know how to take—" I looked at the will on the table. Billions of dollars, a logistics empire, a house that felt more like a museum than a home. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But as I looked at my parents, Dean staring at the wall in catatonic shock, Marla weeping into her napkin not for me, but for her lost lifestyle, I felt nothing but a profound, hollow sadness. They were strangers. I had grown up in this house. I had eaten at this table. I had hugged these people on Christmas mornings for 29 years, but I did not know them. I had been living with parasites who wore the faces of my family. "I do not want it," I said softly. Everyone froze. Dean's head snapped toward me, a flicker of pathetic hope in his eyes. "I do not want the money if it means being related to you," I clarified, looking at my father. The hope in his eyes died instantly. "But I will take it. I will take every single cent. Not because I'm greedy, but because I will not let you have another dime to hurt anyone else with." A sound came from the other side of the table. It was a high-pitched, broken sob. Brielle was crying. She wasn't crying like Marla, theatrical and manipulative. She was crying like someone whose entire world had just collapsed. She looked at Gavin, her husband, with a look of absolute horror. "I did not know," Brielle sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "Reese, I swear, I knew about the emails. I knew they were mean, but I did not know about the forgery. I did not know they were stealing millions. I did not know I was living on stolen money." She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, a ring Gavin had likely bought with the proceeds from my warehouse, and she looked like she wanted to cut her finger off. "You are living in a house of cards, Brielle," I said gently, "and the wind just blew." "This is not revenge," Walter said, his voice softening as he looked at me, then hardening again as he turned to his children. "Revenge would be leaving you to the loan sharks. Dean, revenge would be letting Gavin explain to his investors why his capital has vanished. What I am doing tonight is protection. I am repatriating the assets to their rightful owner." Fallon Reddick stepped forward. She adjusted her glasses, her demeanor shifting from executor to prosecutor. "We need to be very clear about the immediate future," Fallon said. "The police are here for the theft and the forgery, but that is just the beginning. The IRS will be notified about the fraudulent tax filings under the Miles Keaton entity. The Securities and Exchange Commission will be notified about the misuse of funds in the logistics firm." She looked at Dean. "And Mr. Holloway, since you use the company accounts to facilitate personal gambling debts, we are looking at corporate embezzlement charges. The minimum sentence is usually 10 years. The maximum can be 20. Dean made a sound like a whimpering dog. He looked at Marla, but she would not look at him. The alliance was broken, the ship was going down, and the rats were already turning on each other. "You cannot do this to us, Dad," Marla whispered, her voice hoarse. "We are your blood." "Reese is my blood too," Walter said, "and you were willing to bleed her dry." The room fell silent again. The weight of the moment was crushing. The dinner, the roast duck, the expensive wine, the Christmas tree twinkling in the corner, it all felt like a grotesque set dressing for a tragedy. And then, cutting through the silence like a knife, came the sound. Ding-dong. The doorbell rang. It was a cheerful, crisp sound, the kind of sound that usually announces guests arriving with fruitcakes and carolers. But tonight, at exactly 9:15 in the evening, it sounded like the tolling of a funeral bell. Walter looked at the door. He did not look surprised. He checked his watch. "Right on time," Walter said. He looked at Gavin, who was shaking so badly his teeth were chattering. "I believe your ride is here." The heavy oak front door of the Grayson estate did not creak. It swung open with a smooth, well-oiled silence that was somehow more ominous than a slam. From my seat at the dining table, I could not see the foyer directly, but I heard the murmur of Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Her voice was trembling, a stark contrast to the crisp, professional baritone that answered her. Two men walked into the dining room. They were not wearing tactical gear. They did not have their guns drawn. They were dressed in the dark navy uniforms of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, their badges catching the light from the crystal chandelier. One was older, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had seen every lie a human being could tell. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, holding a clipboard. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A moment ago, this had been a family argument. Toxic and high stakes, yes, but still contained within the walls of a private home. Now, it was a crime scene. "Good evening," the older officer said. He did not smile. He did not wish us a Merry Christmas. He scanned the room, his gaze resting briefly on the spilled wine, the scattered papers, and finally on my grandfather. "Mr. Walter Grayson?" "I am Walter Grayson," my grandfather said. He remained standing, his posture erect, leaning slightly on his cane. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Officer." "We are responding to the complaint filed by your legal counsel regarding identity theft," forgery, and grand larceny, the officer said. He stepped further into the room, the heels of his boots clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. I am Sergeant Miller. This is Officer Vance. Dean stood up. It was a reflexive motion, the instinct of a man who was used to being the most important person in the room and assuming he could talk his way out of a parking ticket. Officers, this is a misunderstanding, Dean said, putting on his best boardroom smile, though it wavered at the edges. We are in the middle of a family dinner. There has been a miscommunication regarding some internal business documents. My father-in-law is elderly, and sometimes he gets confused about the details of our estate planning. Sergeant Miller did not look at Dean. He looked at the table. He looked at the document with the red wax seal. He looked at the transparency sheet showing the forged signature. We are not here to adjudicate the estate, sir, Miller said calmly. We are here to secure evidence and serve notices based on a sworn affidavit provided to the district attorney's office this afternoon. Affidavit? Marla squeaked. Her hands were clutching her napkins so tightly, her fingers looked skeletal. What affidavit? Who went to the district attorney? I did, Fallon Reddick said. She stepped forward from the shadows near the sideboard. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, along with the forensic report on the printer data and the handwriting analysis. Dean turned to Fallon, his face twisting in betrayal. You? You represent this family. Fallon? I represent Mr. Walter Grayson, Fallon corrected him, her voice ice cold. And when my client informs me that a felony has been committed against another beneficiary, my ethical obligation is to the law, not to your feelings. Officer Vance stepped forward. He took a small digital camera from his belt. I need everyone to remain seated, Vance said. I am going to document the condition of these documents as they were presented. You cannot take pictures of our private financial records, Gavin shouted. He half rose from his chair, his face flushed. That is confidential information. You need a warrant for that. Sit down, son, Sergeant Miller said. His voice did not rise, but the authority in it hit Gavin like a physical shove. The documents are in plain view, and the owner of the property invited us in. If you touch anything on that table, I will charge you with tampering with evidence right here and now. Do you understand? Gavin froze. He looked at the police, then at the papers, the damning proof of his Miles Keaton persona lying right there next to the gravy boat. He slowly sank back into his chair. Officer Vance moved around the table. Click. He photographed the limited power of attorney. Click. He photographed the wire transfer record showing the money going to Marla's account. Click. He photographed the transparency overlay of the signatures. The flash was bright and harsh, stripping away the warm, ambient glow of the holiday lights, leaving everything looking stark and exposed. This is ridiculous, Dean muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. It is a civil matter. It is a dispute over asset management. The police do not get involved in family trusts. They do when you forge a signature to facilitate a wire transfer across state lines, Miller said. That is wire fraud, sir, and since the amount exceeds $100,000, it is a Class C felony. Miller reached into a folder he was carrying. He pulled out 3 folded sets of papers. He walked over to Gavin first. Gavin Holloway? Gavin did not answer. He just stared at the officer's belt buckle. Take it, Miller said. Gavin reached out with a trembling hand. He took the paper. It was not handcuffs, not yet, but it was a summons, a notice to appear. You are being named as a person of interest in an active investigation regarding forgery and identity theft, Miller stated formally. You are instructed to surrender your passport to the court clerk by 9 a.m. on Monday. You are not to leave the state of North Carolina. Miller moved to Dean. Dean Holloway? Dean took the paper. He looked like he was going to vomit. I need to call my lawyer. That would be advisable, Miller said dryly. Though I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney, not a corporate one. Finally, Miller stopped in front of Marla. My mother looked up at him, her eyes wide and wet, playing the role of the confused, innocent housewife. Officer, please, I do not know anything about business. My husband handles the accounts. I just sign where he tells me. The wire transfer went to a joint account in your name, Mrs. Holloway, Miller said, handing her the summons. Ignorance of the source of funds is not a defense when you spend the money, especially when those funds were obtained through fraud against a dependent. Marla took the paper. She held it like it was a dead rat. Brielle let out a sob. "Officer?" she asked, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Is there any way to stop this? If we pay it back? If we give the money back right now? Can we just drop the charges?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Reese, tell them you do not want to press charges. We will pay you back. Every cent. We will sell the vacation house. Just tell them to go." The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. Dean, Marla, Gavin. They all looked at me with a desperate, hungry hope. They thought that because I was Reese, because I was the quiet one, because I was the one who always tried to keep the peace, I would save them. They thought I would crumble under the pressure of ruining Christmas. I looked at Sergeant Miller. He was watching me too, waiting. Then I looked at my family. I looked at the people who had watched me drive a car with no heat for 3 winters while they sat on a $3 million secret. I looked at the people who had sent emails calling me unstable just to keep me unemployed and dependent. "I cannot stop it, Brielle," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who had finally realized that mercy without justice is just enabling. "The crime has already been reported. The evidence is already in the system." "But you can refuse to cooperate," Dean urged, leaning forward. "If the victim does not testify, the case falls apart. Reese, think about the family name. Think about your mother." "I am thinking about her," I said. "I am thinking about how she cried when I didn't get that job in Chicago, knowing she was the one who killed it." I turned back to the officer. "I intend to cooperate fully," I said. "I will provide whatever statements you need." Dean slumped back in his chair, defeated. Marla buried her face in her hands and began to wail softly. Walter stood at the head of the table, watching the scene unfold. He did not look happy. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just cut off a gangrenous limb to save the body. "Officers," Walter said, "you have documented the evidence?" "Yes, sir," Vance said, lowering his camera. "We have what we need for the preliminary report. We will need to take the physical documents into custody." "Take them," Walter said. "I have copies." Miller began to gather the papers from the table. The forged power of attorney, the emails, the bank records. He slid them into an evidence bag. The sound of the plastic sealing shut was final. "We will be in touch regarding the interview schedule," Miller said to the room at large. "Do not attempt to contact Ms. Holloway to discuss the case. Any attempt to influence a witness will result in immediate arrest and revocation of bail. Do I make myself clear?" Dean nodded weakly. Gavin did not move. The officers turned to leave. They walked out of the dining room, the heavy tread of their boots fading down the hallway. The front door opened and closed. Silence rushed back into the room. But it was different now. It was not the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a crater after the bomb has gone off. "You ruined us," Gavin whispered. He was staring at the tablecloth. His hands were clenched into fists. "You happy now?" "Reese?" Gavin hissed, looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild. "You got your revenge. You got the money. And you sent your own brother to prison. I hope it feels good." "I did not send you to prison, Gavin," I said. "You sent yourself when you signed my name." "I had to," Gavin shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You think I wanted to? You think I wanted to play these games? I had no choice." "We all have choices," Walter said coldly. "No, I didn't." Gavin stood up, his chair crashing over behind him. He was breathing hard, hyperventilating. "You do not get it. None of you get it. It wasn't just about the business debt. It wasn't just about the market." He looked at Dean, and for a second, I saw pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. "We didn't just owe the bank," Gavin blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. Dean borrowed from the wrong people, okay? But he used my name as the guarantor because his credit was shot. And these guys, they don't send lawyers. They send people to break your knees. Dean's face went white. Gavin, shut up. I won't shut up, Gavin screamed. Reese needs to know. She needs to know that by freezing the assets, she didn't just call the cops. She just told the cartel that we can't pay. The word hung in the air. Cartel. My stomach dropped. I looked at Dean. He wasn't denying it. He was just looking at the window, terrified, as if he expected someone to come through the glass. That is why we needed the liquid cash by the first of the year, Gavin said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. That is why we sold the warehouse. It wasn't for lifestyle. Reese, it was for blood money. And now that you froze it. He looked at me, and I realized his shaking wasn't just from the police. Now they are going to come for whoever holds the assets, Gavin said. And thanks to Grandpa's new will, that is you. The echo of the word cartel had barely faded from the dining room when the front door opened again. It was not a slam this time. It was a slow, deliberate creak that made the hair on my arms stand up. Sergeant Miller walked back into the dining room, followed closely by Officer Vance. They had not left the property. They had been standing on the porch, and they had heard everything. I think, Sergeant Miller said, his voice flat and hard, you had better clarify that last statement, Mr. Holloway. Gavin looked at the police, then at Dean. The color had drained so completely from my brother's face that he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the chandelier. It was a figure of speech, Dean stammered, his hands shaking as he tried to button his suit jacket, a futile attempt to regain dignity. My son is emotional. He is exaggerating the nature of our creditors. I am not exaggerating, Gavin screamed, and the dam finally broke. He spun around to face our father, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who knows he is already dead. Stop lying, Dad. They are not creditors. They are not a bank. You borrowed money from the Soloway Syndicate. Dean closed his eyes, a look of pure defeat washing over him. The name seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Even the police officers exchanged a sharp glance. The Soloway Syndicate, Sergeant Miller repeated, pulling a notebook from his pocket. You are telling me that the debt you were trying to cover with the stolen funds is owed to an organized crime ring? We had to, Gavin sobbed, sinking back into his chair. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to be a bridge loan. Dean said we just needed capital for the logistics expansion. But there was no expansion, was there, Dad? I looked at my father, the man who had lectured me on fiscal responsibility my entire life, the man who had told me I was too irresponsible to handle my own trust fund. Dean, Marla whispered. She was looking at him not with anger, but with a terrifying realization. You told me it was a business loan. You told me it was a venture capital angel investor. I lied, Dean whispered. His voice was a dry rattle. 5 years ago, the Spectre Project. The Spectre Project? I asked. What is that? It was a land deal, Dean said, staring at the tablecloth. Swampland in Florida? High risk, high yield. I was told it was a sure thing. I leveraged the company accounts. I put in $2 million. It was a scam. The whole thing was a Ponzi scheme. The money vanished in 48 hours. $2 million, Walter said. He did not sound surprised. He sounded tired. I could not tell you, Dean said, looking up at Walter with wet, pleading eyes. You would have cut me off. You would have fired me. I had to fix it. I thought I could trade my way out of it. I borrowed from the Soloways to cover the hole in the company books before the quarterly audit. I thought I could make it back on currency futures. But you lost that too, I said. It wasn't a question. I lost it all, Dean admitted. And the interest? The interest was 20% a month. It started eating us alive. They called the house. They sent photos of you. Reese, photos of you walking to your car after work. I froze. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. They threatened me? I asked. They threatened everyone, Dean said. But they knew you were the weak link because you didn't have security. They said if I didn't pay by January 1st, they would send a message. So you decided to sell me out to save yourself, I said. We were protecting you, Marla cried out. She slammed her hand on the table, her face twisted in a grotesque parody of maternal concern. Don't you see, Reese? If we didn't pay them, they would have hurt you. We had to liquidate the warehouse. It was the only asset liquid enough to clear the debt in one lump sum. You didn't do it to protect me, I said, my voice rising. You did it to protect your lifestyle. You did it so you wouldn't have to sell this house. You did it so you wouldn't have to admit to Grandpa that you are failures. We needed stability, Marla shouted, tears streaming down her face. I have lived in this house for 30 years. I am a pillar of this community. I could not let us lose everything just because Dean made a mistake. We needed to keep control. Control? Fallon Reddick said. The lawyer stepped forward again. She had been listening quietly, her pen moving across her notepad. Now, she stopped. That brings us to the methodology, Fallon said. She opened the second file on the table, the one containing the emails. Marla, you claimed earlier that you sabotaged Reese's job interviews because you wanted to keep her close. You said it was because you loved her and thought she was fragile. Fallon picked up a printed email. But that isn't the whole truth, is it? I don't know what you mean, Marla sniffed, wiping her eyes. Reese, Fallon said, turning to me. When we looked into the creation of the Miles Keaton entity, not just the signature Gavin forged, but the actual incorporation of the shell company, we found something interesting. Gavin signed the papers, yes, but the introduction, the referral to the shady paralegal service that set up the shell company, that didn't come from Gavin. Fallon looked at Marla. It came from a contact named J.C. in your phone records. Brielle gasped. She looked at Marla, her eyes widening. J.C., Brielle whispered. Julian Calloway? Marla went rigid. Who is Julian Calloway? I asked. He is a fixer, Brielle said, her voice shaking. He is that man Mom met at the country club 2 years ago, the one she said was so resourceful. She told me once that if I ever had a problem that couldn't be solved legally, Julian was the person to call. Brielle looked at Marla with horror. You introduced Dad to the people who set up the fake company? You helped them build the trap? Marla didn't answer. She just stared at the centerpiece. You knew, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You knew about the debt. You knew about the Miles Keaton plan, and that is why you stopped me from getting those jobs. I picked up the rejection emails. If I had gotten the job in Chicago, I said, my voice trembling, I would have moved away. I would have had a salary. I would have had health insurance. I would have been safe. I looked at my mother. But if I moved away, I would have been harder to control. If I had my own money, I might have hired a lawyer to look at the trust. You needed me here. You needed me poor. You needed me desperate. We needed you available, Marla screamed. If you left, how were we supposed to get your signature? How were we supposed to intercept the bank statements? We had to keep you in the house. We had to keep you under our roof so we could manage the mail. You kept me poor so you could rob me, I said. We kept you safe, Marla insisted, but her argument was crumbling into dust. We were going to put the money back. Once Dean's next deal came through. There is no next deal, Marla, Walter roared. It was the first time my grandfather had raised his voice in years. The sound was terrifying. He slammed his cane against the floor. There is no deal. There is no investment. There is only a hole. A black hole that you dug, and then you threw your own daughter into it to fill the gap. Walter looked at them. Dean, Marla, Gavin. I have seen greed, Walter said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I have seen men steal for yachts and cars. But this is something else. You systematically dismantled a young woman's confidence. You made her believe she was worthless. You made her believe she was unemployable. You broke her spirit so that she wouldn't notice you were breaking her bank account. He looked at me. The highest form of betrayal, Walter said softly, is not just hurting someone, it is turning the victim into a person who believes they have no choice but to rely on their abuser. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. He tapped his pen on his notepad. I want to remind everyone, Miller said, looking directly at Dean and Gavin, that you have just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and involvement with a known criminal syndicate. These statements are being noted in my official report. They will be admissible in court. I didn't mean it, Gavin panicked. I was under duress. I was scared of the cartel. Duress does not justify forging a federal document, Miller said, and it certainly does not justify stealing $500,000 from a family trust. We are done, Walter said. He signaled to Fallon. Show them the last piece, Walter commanded. Lock it down. Fallon reached into her briefcase one final time. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a log, a digital access log. We talked about the signature, Fallon said. We talked about the printer. But there was one loose end. Dean, you claimed that this was all Gavin's doing, that you just followed instructions. And Marla, you claimed you were just a passive wife signing papers. She placed the log on the table. This is the access log for the secure server where the Miles Keaton entity was managed online. To move that money 3 weeks ago, two-factor authentication was required. She pointed to the first entry. Authentication 1, sent to Gavin's mobile phone, verified. She pointed to the second entry. Authentication 2, sent to a secondary device, the device registered to Marla Grayson Holloway. Marla froze. And the IP address for the final authorization, Fallon said, looking at Dean. Came from the laptop in your private study, Dean, at 3 a.m. Fallon looked at the three of them. You all clicked approve. You all entered the codes. It wasn't one of you dragging the others. It was a firing squad, and you all pulled the trigger together. The room was silent. There was no more wiggling room, no more excuses about clerical errors or bad advice. The digital footprint proved they had acted as a coordinated unit to execute the theft. Officer, Walter said to Miller, I believe you have everything you need for the arrest warrants. We do, Miller said. He reached for his radio. Dispatch. This is Miller. We are going to need transport for 3 subjects at the Grayson residence. I looked at my family. Dean was weeping silently. Gavin was staring at the wall. Marla was looking at her hands. They weren't looking at me. They weren't apologizing. They were just mourning the end of their own lives. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I just felt the weight of the last decade lifting off my shoulders. You said you did it for stability, I said to Marla. I looked around the beautiful, expensive dining room that was about to be empty. Well, I said, you are going to have a very stable routine where you are going. Fallon Reddick did not pack up her briefcase. She had one final document to present, the capstone that would seal the tomb on my family's deception. While Sergeant Miller called for transport, Fallon laid the last sheet of paper on the table. It was not a legal threat or a bank statement. It was a timeline. This, Fallon said, her voice cutting through the panic in the room like a cold wind, is the final nail. We have talked about the digital footprints and the forged signatures, but the defense will always argue that these were separate, unfortunate events. That is why I constructed this. She pointed to a timeline that spanned the last 72 hours. Here, she pointed to the first mark, is the timestamp of the wire transfer authorization, 3:18 in the morning, executed from Dean's laptop. She moved her finger to the right. Here is the timestamp of the security system at Gavin's house, showing him arriving at this estate at 3:05 in the morning. He did not come for a late-night visit. He came to provide the physical two-factor authentication key. Fallon looked at Marla. And here, she pointed to the third mark, is a text message sent from Marla's phone to Dean's phone at 3:20 in the morning. It says simply, "It is done. Go to sleep." The room was deathly quiet. This was not a series of mistakes. It was a coordinated military operation against their own blood. There is no administrative error defense for this, Fallon said, closing the folder with a finality that echoed in the room. This is conspiracy. It is premeditated, coordinated, and executed with full knowledge of the illegality. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his radio crackling with the response from dispatch. He looked at the three people sitting across from me, the people who had raised me, the people who had shared my DNA, the people who had just been dissected by their own greed. We are proceeding with the arrests, Miller announced. His tone was professional, devoid of the shock he likely felt. However, given the nature of the financial crimes and the involvement of potentially dangerous third parties mentioned by Mr. Gavin Holloway, we are establishing a protective protocol for the victim. He turned to me. Ms. Holloway, we will need a formal sworn statement from you at the precinct tomorrow morning at 9. Until then, I am instructing the suspects that any contact with you, direct, indirect, digital, or through intermediaries, will be considered witness tampering and intimidation. That is an automatic revocation of bail. Dean looked up. His face was a mask of sheer desperation. The arrogance was gone. The boardroom facade was gone. He was just a terrified man looking at the wreckage of his life. Reese, Dean said. His voice was cracked and pleading. Reese, you have to say something. You have to tell them that we can handle this internally. Please, if they take us out in handcuffs, the news, the investors, it will all be over. The logistics firm will collapse by morning. He reached out a hand, hovering over the table, afraid to touch me but desperate to reach me. I am your father, he whispered. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we were drowning. You cannot let them destroy us. Just tell them you want to pause the complaint. Just give us 24 hours to fix it. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had leveraged my future to buy swampland in Florida. I looked at the man who had watched me stitch up my winter coat because I could not afford a new one, knowing he had stolen millions from me. Fix it? I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. How do you plan to fix it, Dad? By forging another signature? By finding another loan shark? By being a family, Marla wailed. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Reese, baby, please, we can heal this. We can go to therapy. We can pay the money back over time. Do not destroy this family. Do not choose strangers over your own mother. We love you. We have always loved you. Love, I repeated. I stood up. My legs felt solid. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like the small, shaky girl they had trained me to be. You spent 4 years telling potential employers that I was unstable, I said, looking directly into Marla's eyes. You spent 4 years writing emails that destroyed my reputation so that I would stay poor and dependent on you. You let me believe I was a failure. You watched me cry myself to sleep. Mom, and you did it so you could keep your country club membership. Marla flinched as if I had struck her. That is not love, I said. That is ownership, and I am not your property anymore. I did not want to send the emails, Gavin shouted, jumping up, turning on his parents. She made me do it. Reese, you have to believe me. Mom wrote the drafts. She said if you left, the whole house of cards would fall. She manipulated me too. You coward, Dean roared at Gavin. You signed the papers. You were the one who came up with the Miles Keaton name. Do not try to pin this on your mother. Because you were too drunk to think straight, Gavin screamed back, his face purple. You were passing out from stress every night. Someone had to take the wheel. I was trying to save your mess. Dad, I ruined my life trying to clean up your gambling addiction. You ruined us all, Marla shrieked at Gavin. If you had just kept your mouth shut about the cartel, if you had not panicked, we could have talked Reese down. They were screaming at each other now, a cacophony of blame and hatred. They were tearing each other apart, exposing every ugly secret, every resentment they had buried under years of polite Christmas dinners. It was grotesque. It was a pit of vipers realizing there was no more prey. So they had begun to bite each other. Walter watched them. He did not say a word. He stood like a stone statue in the middle of the storm, his eyes filled with a profound, quiet grief. "Stop," Walter said. It was not a shout, but the command cut through the noise instantly. The three of them fell silent, panting, their faces flushed with rage and fear. They looked at the old man they had all tried to deceive. Walter turned to me. He walked around the table, his cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. He stopped in front of me and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. "Reese," he said softly. I looked at him. "I am sorry, Grandpa," I whispered. "I am sorry I broke the family." Walter shook his head. His eyes were clear and kind. "No," he said firmly. "You did not break anything. You simply turned on the light." He looked at Dean, Marla, and Gavin. "This was broken a long time ago," Walter said. "They broke it with every lie, every stolen dollar, every moment they chose their own comfort over your well-being." He squeezed my shoulder. "You are feeling a loss right now," Walter said. "I can see it in your eyes. You feel like you have lost your mother, your father, your brother. But listen to me closely. Reese?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant only for me. "Tonight, you did not lose a family. You only lost an illusion. The people who loved you, they never existed. These people, they are just strangers who shared a mailing address." I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. He was right. I was mourning a ghost. I was mourning a version of my parents that had been a fiction all along. I wiped my face and turned to Sergeant Miller. "Officer," I said. My voice was clear. It did not shake. "I am ready to proceed. I will be at the station tomorrow morning to file the full affidavit. I am not withdrawing the complaint. I want to press charges on all counts." "Understood," Miller said. "Reese, no!" Brielle sobbed from the corner. But she did not move to stop me. She knew it was over. "You are ungrateful," Marla hissed, her face twisting into something ugly and final. "After everything we gave you." "You gave me nothing," I said. "And now, I am taking back what is mine." The officers moved in. They did not use handcuffs yet, but the formation was clear. They were escorting the three of them out. They guided Dean, Marla, and Gavin toward the foyer. As they passed me, Gavin looked at the floor. Dean stared straight ahead, a broken man. Marla looked at me with pure hatred, the mask finally gone forever. The front door opened. The cold night air rushed in, mixing with the scent of the cooling roast duck. I heard the heavy doors of the police cruisers opening and closing. I heard the static of the radios, and then the sound of engines fading into the distance. The house was silent. It was a heavy, thick silence, the kind of silence that happens after a hurricane has passed. Walter sighed. He looked old. He looked tired, but he also looked relieved. "I will call the lawyers," Walter said. "We have a lot of work to do on Monday. We need to audit the company. We need to restructure the trust. It will be a difficult year." "Reese?" "I am not afraid of work, Grandpa," I said. "I have been working double shifts for 4 years. I think I can handle running an empire." Walter smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one I had seen on his face in a long time. "I know you can," he said. "Go on, take a moment. I will clean up this mess." He gestured to the table, to the ruins of the Christmas dinner that never happened. I turned and walked toward the French doors that led to the back veranda. I opened them and stepped out into the night. The air was freezing, sharp and clean against my skin. The suburbs of Charlotte were quiet. Snow was starting to fall, tiny white flakes drifting down from the dark sky. I wrapped my arms around myself, but I did not feel cold. Inside the house, the sound system was still playing. The playlist had looped back to the beginning. The soft, crooning voice of Bing Crosby drifted out through the open door, singing about a white Christmas. I looked out at the dark yard. I thought about my apartment with the broken heater. I thought about the rejection letters. I thought about the years of doubting my own sanity. All of that was gone. The debt was not mine. The shame was not mine. The lies were not mine. I took a deep breath. filling my lungs with the icy air. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. The weight of their expectations, their manipulation, their protection, it had all evaporated the moment the police car doors slammed shut. I looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and cold. "Tonight," I whispered to the empty yard, my voice strong and sure. "Tonight, Christmas finally belongs to me." Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed seeing justice finally served cold. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while cooking dinner, driving to work, or just relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Reese's decision. Did she do the right thing by sending her family to jail? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel so you never miss a new episode. Hit that like button to show your support, and if you really want to help this story reach more people, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing you these dramas. Thank you, and see you in the next story.